past few decades, archaeologists and historians have unveiled countless mind-boggling mysteries from the past. These eye-opening incidents are just like pieces of an enormous jigsaw puzzle. Therefore, they keep you enthralled until you can connect all the pieces. The myth of Bochica, a civilizing hero, is one such example of the most captivating tales from the past. Around 7 chroniclers wrote extensively on this Colombian hero figure. Stay tuned to find out more about the writings of Spanish chroniclers on Bochica. Muisca mythical tradition has left us with many fascinating incidents and characters. Perhaps Bochica is the most inexplicable character found in Muisca mythology. He was regarded as a god and civilizing hero during the 16th century in present-day Colombia. According to chroniclers, Bochica was a tall man with a long beard who wore a long robe to cover himself. He had white hair and carried a staff made of gold with him. Depending on various regions of the Muisca Federation, Bochica was given various names. In Bacata he was called Nemqueteba, Chimisapagua, Chimisayagua, Sue, Hue, Neutereketewa, and Suha. Similarly, in Suamox and Hunza, people named him Sugumonxe, Sadigua, and Sugunsua. In some other areas, Bochica was known as Idacansas. However, some authors like José Antonio de Plaza believe that Idacansas and Bochica were two different characters. Idacansas was thought of as the first high priest at Tsagomusu. You may be wondering which act of Bochica was so influential that he was praised by people of his era. Well, here's the deal. Bochica taught blanket weaving and cotton spinning to the Muisca people. As a result, the Muisca people began to financially prosper. According to mythical tradition, Bochica was also the creator of Salto del Tequendama, a begilding Colombian destination. He also worked to raise the moral and social standards of the Muiscas. These facts are present in the works of 7 chroniclers from the 16th to the 19th century. Bochica is known to combine hero, culture, sun, and other transformation aspects. This trait is common in the case of many New World gods. As he was a patron of goldsmiths and chieftains, extensive gold crafts were given to him. After spending some time in the Muisca region, Bochica traveled to the west and then eastwards again. Finally, he arrived at Sugamusu, on the eastern border of the Muisca. This is the place where Bochica's existence came to an end. Some chroniclers believe that he died, while others think that he simply disappeared. Interestingly, the Muisca people even believed that Bochica became the sun. This was understandable, as Muisca people often call him Sun too. The Muisca people, belonging to the Chibcha civilization, resided in ancient Colombia between 600 and 1600 CE. They flourished to form the Muisca Confederation before the Spanish conquest began in 15th century. These indigenous people spoke Mosca or Muisca, a language belonging to the Chibchan language family. Muisca territory was spread over 25,000 square kilometers. All the regions from the north of Boyaca to the Sumpas Paramo, as well as summits to the western portion of the eastern ranges, were part of the territory. This civilization also had subgroupings based on their allegiances to one of the 3 great rulers. Hua throned in Hunza and ruled northeastern and southern Boyaca and southern Santander. Most of modern Cundinamarca, the Iraca, and the western Llanos were under Sihipcua, centered in Muicuita. Lastly, Suamox was a religious ruler with modern-day northeastern Boyaca and southwestern Santander under his control. Muisca or Chibcha civilization included indigenous people who practiced agriculture. Alexander von Humboldt mentioned this in his writings as well. Quote, "The Spaniards were surprised at seeing themselves transported into a country where, on soil of little fertility, the fields everywhere yielded plentiful harvests of maize, chenopodium, quinoa, and turmas or potatoes. I shall not here examine whether, notwithstanding the introduction of corn and horned cattle, the plain of Bogota is less populous in our days than before the conquest, but shall only observe that when I visited the mines of gem salt of Zipaquira, I was shown the most certain indications of former culture in lands now left desolate, to the north of the Indian village of Shuba. End quote. Apart from this, Muisca people were popular for their mesmerizing gold work. They thought that there was an association between gold and the sun. Additionally, it was valuable because of its unique shine and malleability. Most of the time, Muisca used it as an artistic medium. Nose studs, earrings, and other jewelry items were made regularly. Trading, metalworking, and salt mining were some of the activities regulating the economy. Today, the Muisca people are most well known for their legend of El Dorado, also called the Gilded One. It revolves around a ceremony that took place at Lake Guatavita. An emperor would cover himself in gold dust. Afterwards, he would sit on a raft and row to the lake's center. Meanwhile, subjects would drop emeralds and other precious items into the lake. Upon hearing this story, the Spanish people decided to leap beyond reality for expressing their lust and imagination. Therefore, within a very less time, a legend describing an outstanding city of gold became famous. This city was never found. It did not exist in the first place. Even the lake did not make revelations. Countless costly attempts were simply a waste. During the time of invasion by the Spanish, Muisca territory had a swelling population. Although the precise number is not known, there are a few assumptions. These approximations range from 500,000 to 3 million. After Spanish colonization, the Muisca population saw a sharp decline. Finally, it got blended into the general population. However, descendants of Muisca can still be found in some pastoral municipalities. In 2005, the Ministry of Interior Affairs came up with a census. According to this census, there are around 14,051 Muisca people left in Colombia. The Chroniclers text describing Bochica that I now will present to you is gathered from a transcript named Mitologia Muisca. I have put a link to it in the description. The first chronicler text that I'm going to present that is describing Bochica comes from a chronicler named Juan de Castillanos. He was born in the province of Sevilla in 1522. Fray Juan de Castillanos was a Spanish explorer, soldier, chronicler and priest. Before 1545, he traveled to America as a cavalry soldier. He abandoned the military profession and became a priest in Cartagena. He composed the epic poem Elegias de Varones Ilustres de Indias. Castellanos was among the earliest conquistadors and was acquainted with nearly every prominent leader of the time. Now I will present what he wrote about Bochica. Quote, "It is true that Muisca Indians tell how in the past centuries a stranger came who was called Neu Terequeteua, or Bochica by another name, or Sue, who, according to some, were only 3 men who came at different times preaching. But more commonly, only one had all 3 said attributes. This one had a very long beard and hair down to the waist, with a headband surrounded and tied, in the manner of the bun that they use in them, or like the ancient Pharisees, the wide phylacteries or crowns with which they surrounded the head, and from the Decalogue, the commandments placed in the middle of the forehead. Well, in this way, they have a rose of feathers in the middle of the bun that they use. So, he was walking, according to what they say, with his soles on the ground, without shoes, wearing an almalafa, the ends of which he tied over his shoulder with a knot, from which they say they took to walking barefoot, and in the same suit and with long hair, because very few occupy the cheeks. This man preached many things to them, which, if they were good, they paid little attention to, because they forgot them." and Bochica, who is Neuterequetewa, whom they praise as very holy, does not seem to me that he should be, since they claim he died in Sugamusu, where they are the greatest idolaters, and the universal abyss of these errors. And at the time of his death, according to what they say, he left the cacique as heir to his great holiness and power. And today they consider that territory to be a holy land, and that the cacique of it has hand to be able to change the storms, rain and hail, and send ice, and the other effects that come from the middle region and low and high. The next chronicler text that I'm going to present comes from Alonso Molina de Medrano, who was born around 1550 and died in 1616. Medrano's description of the new kingdom of Granada, published in 1599, became extremely popular. This work revolves around the myth of Bochica. Medrano did not give any name to Bochica, but simply called him as the Holy Man throughout his writing. He mentioned that Bochica came 1500 years ago from the east, around 1500 years before he wrote this description in 1599. Medrano wrote that Bochica had blonde hair and was accompanied by a camel and wore a long dress. The text I'm going to present comes from History of the Province of the Compañía Jesus of New Spain, Volume 2. Quote, "There came to this land, from the east, a holy man, white, with a long dress and blonde hair up to his shoulders, who preached to them and taught them the way of his salvation. This man was walking on a camel that he brought with him, and no other has been seen around here, and they paint him by signs, and he taught them to baptize the children at birth, and from here they got the custom, which they now have, of taking their newborns to wash in the river. This holy man was held in great veneration among them, and when he went to preach from one town to another, they say that the roads were opened for him, and that the mountains were leveled. And the people who followed him and go through these open roads on foot with great reverence. And these paths last until today, and they are called the races, of which I have seen two. One is in a town called Bochica, in which one can see one of these races, more than 3 leagues long, very wide and even. And most of it goes along the side of a large and rough mountain range, which can easily be judged to have been miraculously done, as it is well done. I saw another in the aforementioned town of Bogota, which will be the league of a half long, and less than a stone throws wide, so even and straight, as if it had been made with string. And many others in other parts of this kingdom, to which the Indians have races. Since those times, so much veneration that, today, they do not walk through them, but move aside to the sides, by other paths, although the royal road for the Spaniards go through the races. Of these and many more in the province of Sugamusu, where the aforementioned holy man died. And there is a tradition among the Indians that his holy body and that of the camel are buried here. It may be that this story is a hoax like others that the Indians tell, but if it was true, it can be believed, as some historians want, that some disciples of the apostles or of those of the apostle of Santiago came to these parts, as he refers to the Indians of Cusco in Peru, who have another such tradition." End quote. The next chronicler text comes from Fray Pedro Simone. He was a Spanish Franciscan, professor and chronicler, who spent most of his professional life in the Spanish America. Fray Pedro is linked to the history of Colombia and Venezuela for his extensive work that deals with the conquest and beginnings of the colonization of the territory where those countries ended up being formed. Simone arrived in the new kingdom of Granada in 1604 with the mission of establishing studies in the Franciscan province. In 1623 he started writing his most notable work, Noticias Historias de las Conquistas de Tierra Firma en las Indias Occidentales published in Cuenca, Spain in 1626. Now I will present what he wrote about Bochica. Quote, "What helps a lot is a very certain version that all those of this kingdom have, of having come to it 20 ages ago, and they count in each age 60 years, a man unknown to anyone, already older in years, and loaded with wool, long hair, and a beard down to the waist, holding the hair with a ribbon. He walked his feet on the ground without any shoes, a galafa or blanket placed with a knot made from the 2 points on the right shoulder, and as a dress, a tunic without a collar down to the collar. They say that he came from the eastern part, which are the plains that are called continuous from Venezuela, and entered this kingdom through the town of Pasca to the south of this city of Santa Fe. From there he came to the town of Busa, where a camel he was bringing died, whose bones they tried to preserve, since the Spaniards still found some in that town when they entered, among whom they say it was the rib they worshipped in the small lagoon called. In this valley of Bogota they commonly called him Chimisabagua, which means messenger of Chiminigagua, who is that supreme god whom they knew by principle of light and other things, because Gagua in their language is the same as the sun because of the light it has. And so too the Spaniards, understanding that they were his sons, until they disillusioned them with their cruelties and bad treatment. And so they changed their name, calling them Suegagua, which means devil or demon with light, because with this name Suetiva names the devil, and it is given to the Spaniards today. Others called this man Nemterequeteba. Others called him Hue. He taught them to spin cotton and weave blankets, because before this the Indians only covered themselves with sheets that they made of raw cotton, tied with some strings of fique to each other, all poorly dressed and still like rough people. When he left the town, he would leave them the looms painted on some smooth and polished stone, as they are seen today in some places, in case they forgot what he was teaching them, as they forgot many other good things that they say he preached in his own language to each town, with which they were amazed. He taught them to make crosses and use them in the paintings of the blankets with which they covered themselves, and by chance declaring their mysteries and those of the incarnation and death of Christ. He would tell them sometime the words that he himself said to Nicodemus, trying of the correspondence that the cross had with the metal serpent that Moses raised in the desert, with whose visa those bitten by serpents healed. He also taught them the resurrection of the flesh and other very good things, as was his life. From Busa he went to the town of Juntibun, Bogota, Cerezuela, and Chipacon, from where he went around to the north, through the foothills of the mountains, opening the roads there, and in everything else that went through the mountains and arquebuses. He went to the town of Cota, where he spent a few days preaching, with a great concurrence of people from all the surrounding towns, from a slightly high place, whom they made a moat of more than 2,000 steps around, so that the course of people would not run over him, and preach more freely. Where later, in reverence for him, the most important Indians made sanctuaries and burials. He would go to a cave at night in the foothills of the mountains, all the time he was in Cota, from where he continued his journey to the northeast, until he reached the province of Guane, where there is a lot of news about him. And they still say there were so curious Indians there that they portrayed him, albeit very crudely, on some stones that can be seen today, and some figures from some calices inside the caves where they gathered on the leafy banks of the great Sugamoso River. From Guane he turned towards the east and entered the province of Tunya and Valle de Sugamuso, where he disappeared, leaving traces of our faith in all that province to this day, as we will soon say." End quote. In another chapter called Sedigua, Sugumongse, ou Sugunsua, Pedro Simone writes, quote, The news that those of this province have, especially the Segarnosos of that preacher that we said had passed through these lands, is no less than that of these Bogotas. And so they say that in the time of a Bochica of that valley, called Numpanen, there would be 4 ages, which they name by this word Bugunua, came a man of the same size and dress that we painted about him in these lands of Bogota, who he preached and taught many good things, traces of which still remain. He had a sign of the cross on his head and arms, and on top of it a baton that he carried by staff in his hand. He also gave it to be understood that souls were immortal, and that they would receive reward or punishment, depending on how they had lived in this life when they left their bodies, which were to resuscitate and have another life, although they understood they had to need food in it as in this one. He also taught them to spin cotton and weave blankets and other things of political life, like those from Bogota, during the time he was with them, which was not a little, after which he arrived at the town of Itza, and having preached and taught them the same thing, from there he disappeared. They never saw him again, leaving there on a stone stamped one of his feet, in which he has so much devotion today. The pregnant Indians who are going to scrape off that stone and drink it in water to have a good birth. The next chronicler text comes from Bernardo de Vargas Machuca. He was a soldier in the Spanish army, a veterinarian and a writer. He arrived in New Granada in 1582 or 1583. After retiring from his military career, he produced many exceptional works as a chronicler. His writings on Bochica are one of them. The following text comes from the book La Destrucción de las Indias, published in 1621. Quote, "Very old Indians, who more than others knew about it from their parents and ancestors, that from hand to hand it must have come from more than 1,500 years, according to the count they gave by moons, as if we were saying months, that a man with a long beard passed through that land, and his clothes was according to how they dressed. It is as they describe the one of the apostles, and if it differs in something it is very little, and that he had in his hand an insignia similar to the one that was there on that rock, which he himself painted with the big nail of his right hand, and that he pretended to give them a new doctrine, and different from the one they had." End quote. The next chronicler text comes from Fray Esteban de Asenio. In 1561, Fray Esteban moved to the new kingdom of Granada, taking care of the missionary work of his community. He was later appointed custodian of the Franciscan order in the new kingdom. The text I'm going to present comes from a book called Memorial de la Fundación de Santa Fe del Nuevo Reino de Granada del Orden de San Francisco. Quote, "It is found by certain and created relationship that an apostle or holy man came to the new kingdom, to the land of these Muiscas Indians, and that he preached to them the things of faith, the immortality of souls, eternal glory, and made God known to them, and replied the holy baptism. When this saint wanted to cross the river of Cota, which is 3 leagues from the city of Santa Fe, from Cota to Suba, he threw his dress into the water and passed on it, and from there the Indians had great respect for him. And in memory of him, and from this fact that there are some races that the Indians are used to making in the fields, of which there are today many throughout the new kingdom, which are roads made by hand, in which it is believed that there are many riches of gold and holy rivers, and this river that they call Bogota or Tunja has great fall through some rocks, more than 500 states, and the Indians wanting to plunge it over there, they took it there, and throwing their clothes in the water. Before reaching the cliff, he passed to the other side, and seeing this miracle, the Indians went out to a plain to shoot him with arrows. And from the arrows they shot, without hitting him, many of them returned to the same Indians who shot at him, and killed them, and the Indians being so amazed at this miracle, the holy man went to Sugamusu, which is now within the limits of the city of Tunya, a town of the Indians of the royal crown, and there he died and is buried. The next chronicler text comes from Friedrich Wilhelm Heinrich Alexander von Humboldt. He was born in Germany in 1769. He was a naturalist, explorer, geographer, polymath, and a scientific and romantic philosopher. Between 1799 and 1804, he traveled a lot in the Americas. His intention was to explore and describe it from a Western point of view. His descriptions were published in many volumes over a period of 21 years. Now I will present what he wrote about Bochica. In the remotest times, before the moon accompanied the earth, according to the mythology of the Muisca or Mosca Indians, the inhabitants of the plain of Bogota lived like barbarians, naked, without any form of laws or religious worship. Suddenly appeared among them an old man who came from the plains situate on the east of the Cordillera of Chingasa, and who appeared to be of a race unlike that of the natives, having a long and bushy beard. He was known by 3 distinct appellations: Bochica, Nemketeba, and Sue. Bochica was not only considered as the founder of a new worship and lawgiver of the Muiscas, he was also attributed the invention of the calendar. He had prescribed also the order of the sacrifices, which were to be celebrated at the end of the small cycles, on account of the 5th lunar intercalation. In the empire of the Sake, the day, Sua, and the night, Su, were divided into 4 parts, namely Sua Mena from sunrise till noon, Sua Meka from noon till sunset, Saska from sunset till midnight, and Sagui from midnight till sunrise. The word Sua or Suha denotes in the Muisca language both the day and the sun. From Sua, which is one of the surnames of Bochica, is derived Sue, a European or white man, a singular denomination which takes its origin from the circumstance that the people, on the arrival of Quesada, considered the Spaniards as children of the sun, Sua. End quote. As indicated by the text of the 7 Chroniclers, Bochica was an extremely influential figure in Colombia before the Spanish invasion. In the writings, chroniclers explain the appearance of Bochica as a wise man. Almost all chroniclers describe him to have a long beard that reached his waist. Moreover, Bochica covered himself thoroughly with a white blanket. Some of them use the word robe instead of blanket. Apart from his appearance, chroniclers have also shared how they could observe that Bochica had a very strong influence on the Chibcha civilization. Writings of the chroniclers on Bochica clearly show how the Muiscans consider him to be extremely holy. After all, he had given them a clear path to follow. His presence did not only make them financially flourish, but also improve their characters. The chroniclers mention how Bochica left the cacique as his heir before his death or disappearance. Overall, the experience of studying the legend of Bochica is thrilling. One does not only get to know about Colombian history, but also gets an insight into the historical occurrences in the nearby areas during the same era.